So we all have at least one great story of running for the last train. My best one involves actually a Tokyo subway platform, my very first week in Japan on study abroad. The last trains for both directions of the Uracho line were at the platform, doors opening, alarms blaring as I come running down the stairs to the platform. I didn't really even know at this point where I lived yet, but I only had moments to pick a train. So I picked the side of the platform where the names seemed at least vaguely more familiar, and I got on the train. And I ended up making it home that night. Sometimes train stories involve knowingly deciding that you're not going to take the last train and all of the various commitments that come along with that. I'm not really a partier, so on very, very few occasions in my study abroad and jet career did I ever intentionally stay out past the last train. Usually I had a friend to stay with. Once, just once, did I decide to throw caution to the wind. Armin van Buuren, my favorite trance music DJ, was playing at Ageha, an amazing club in Tokyo. So a fellow Aomori jet and I took the night bus down to Hirosaki, which is a 10-hour overnight bus ride. Yes, I'm sure you've all taken them and they're awful. That night, I got to sleep in a hostel and I woke up the next morning with a scratchy throat. But undeterred, I packed up my stuff, checked out of the hostel, and I defiantly went to that Armin van Buuren show. As the night wore on, it became abundantly clear that I was sick. From my position pressed up against the front fencing directly under Armin van Buuren, probably somewhere between 4 and 5 a.m., I was desperately trying to dance and enjoy every drop of music while simultaneously coughing my lungs up and secretly wishing that the set would end before I keeled over and died. And then I got noticed. Armin van Buuren noticed me. He smiled at me. And yeah, I know a lot of people say that musicians smile at them from the stage, but do you know how I knew that he was smiling at me? Because then he looked me straight in the face and his crunched up with concern and he mouthed, "Are you okay?" So, not generally how a girl likes to be noticed, but I got noticed. So about 6 a.m., I stumbled out of Ageha and I hopped on the first train back to Ueno Station, where I stole 20 minutes of sleep next to a squatty potty in the ladies' room stall before a cleaning lady knocked on the door. On the Shinkansen back to Aomori, I texted my supervisor. She picked me up and brought me immediately to the hospital for a flu test, where I then spent, or rather at home, I then spent the next 4 days deliriously sleeping off H1N1. But boy, do I have one hell of a story to tell. Now, the last train is always a setup for a good story. But for me and many other Inaka jets, I'm sure, the last train isn't just a great story setup. The last train really became more of a character that weaved throughout our whole jet experience, a definer of our lives, a limiter of our stories, and sometimes a jailer if you allowed it. You see, my last train was at 10:30 p.m. every day, and I was a 40-minute train ride from Aomori City. That means that going into town after work during the week was completely pointless. And on the weekends, evening activities were strictly limited if you wanted to go home that night. And I was lucky. There was a jet 2 stops north of me whose last train was at 4:30 p.m. 4:30 p.m. So the last train defines my jet experience in another unique way. My jet placement was, as I like to only half-jokingly describe it, as far north on the main island as you can go without falling off. My train was literally at the end of the line on the Suguru side of Honshū. I have literally taken the Shinkansen to the last stop, gotten onto the local train and taken that to the last stop, then gotten on the bus and taken that to the last stop on the island of Honshū. I've stood in a classroom at one of my schools, looked across the Suguru Strait at Hokkaido. The last train indeed. It's a point of pride and a badge of honor that lets me be super smug about living in real Japan. That and the Suguru Ben accent that I unknowingly cultivated while I lived there. It's also a really bittersweet part of my jet story. It made days in Aomori City sweet and memorable because they were spare and hard to come by. And I have memories of both bubbling with energy and excitement on my way into the city and arguing with my best jet friend over whether to take the second to last or the last train, and missing out on a few sweet moments of freedom and novelty. I remember feeling trapped and confined, my world shrunken down to the town of Kanita and its 3,000 residents. From the dark Aomori winter, it felt a little like living in a real life snow globe. Ultimately, the limitations of that last train were one of the many threads that were woven into my decision not to recontract so that I could reconnect with the world and re expand my horizons despite my deep love for my students, my schools, and my community. 8 years after leaving JET, my husband and I went to Japan for our 1 year anniversary. I took him on the Shinkansen to the last stop in Aomori City. Then I took him on the local train to the last stop in Minmaya. Then I took him on the bus to the last stop at Tapizaki. He climbed off the bus and he turned, looked at me, and said, "Where the hell are we?" As we stood together and looked out across the Suguru Strait at Hokkaido, I told him, "We're as far north on the main island as you can go without falling off."